The Galactic Council chamber was silent, a cathedral of diplomacy built from eons of tradition. Every movement was ritual. Every word was chosen not for meaning, but for its lack of offense. Across hundreds of species, this etiquette had become law. The politeness protocol governed every syllable exchanged. No raised tones, no contradictions, no direct requests. Power lay in restraint, and civilization was measured by how little anyone said while still seeming agreeable. For 3,000 years, this system had kept the galaxy stable. Wars were not ended by force, but by the grinding attrition of protocol, by delay and bureaucratic precision. Disputes took decades to resolve by design. This was seen as wisdom. Passion was dangerous. Certainty was uncivil. The Council's great pride was its perfect decorum, a society that had elevated courtesy above conflict, ambiguity above truth. And then came humanity. They did not arrive with ceremony. No musical frequencies layered in harmonic greeting. No glyph projected lineage recitations. They entered the chamber in utilitarian suits, eyes scanning, no visible effort to emit peace pheromones or neural sync greetings. The lead envoy, Elena Park, offered a handshake. The nearest ambassador flinched as if struck. The human spoke directly. "Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to getting started." It was not just the informality. It was the tone. There was no verbal buffer. No slow lead-in, no formal address. Not even a symbolic nod to the rules of linguistic dance. It was an unfiltered declaration. And it landed in the chamber like a dropped wrench in a temple. Several members of the council turned various shades, pale, violet, bioluminescent orange. One delegate emitted a burst of spores indicating distress. A translator droned stuttered mid-phrase. The chamber's harmony fractal, a subtle hum that adjusted based on emotional balance, spiked out of tune for the first time in centuries. They had heard of humans, of course. Violent, impulsive, survivors of dozens of internal wars. Their vetting had taken generations longer than most species. But data files and cautious probes could not prepare anyone for their presence. It was not the volume of their speech. It was the weight of it. The refusal to pad. To defer. To hide behind half-meanings. In their first hour, the humans sat while others stood. They asked questions before introductions were complete. They requested specific answers to open-ended summaries. When handed a 300-page ceremonial greeting document, they replied, "Can someone give me the one-paragraph version?" The council, used to decisions unfolding over lifetimes, was forced into reactive posture. Their systems weren't built for immediacy. Every reaction was measured, processed, and cleansed of emotional resonance before being released. But the humans responded in real time. They didn't just listen. They engaged. When the chairbeing of the council extended a 5-minute welcome ritual composed of 4 species languages and 2 postures of submission, the human delegate responded, "Thanks. Can we talk about the agenda now?" There was no malice. That's what made it worse. If the humans had been hostile, the council had procedures for that. But this was something else. This was indifference to tradition, unawareness of sacred nuance. Their bluntness wasn't an attack. It was simply how they operated. The council quickly realized that their newest members were not maliciously impolite. They were fundamentally different. Humans didn't soften their presence to fit into centuries-old harmonies. They walked into the room and expected reality to adapt to them. Their confidence wasn't performative. It was structural. They assumed their clarity was an asset, not a violation. In private, ambassadors murmured, how had the humans achieved spaceflight with such aggression in their communication? How had they survived long enough to reach the stars without protocol shielding them from offense? But that was the thing. Humans had survived because of conflict. They had adapted through it, not around it. The politeness protocol, for all its elegance, had no clause for dealing with truths spoken plainly. The humans didn't shout. They didn't threaten. But every word they said landed with the weight of finality. They didn't perform diplomacy. They meant what they said. And that terrified the council more than any weapon ever could. By the end of the first day, nothing official had happened. No votes, no decrees. But the chamber was different. It felt smaller, louder, less predictable. For 3,000 years, every species had learned to coexist by not disturbing the water. The humans didn't just disturb it. They walked straight in and stirred. And the worst part? Some members found themselves drawn to it. Not the methods, but the certainty. The conviction. The willingness to look at a problem and say, "Here's what's wrong." No consultation. No elegant phrasing. Just truth. That night, for the first time in recorded memory, an ambassador from a minor species asked a question at the evening assembly. Not submitted in writing. Not passed through committee. Just asked? Aloud. The effect was immediate. The humans had done more than disrupt the chamber. They'd introduced possibility. And possibility, in a galaxy so tightly bound by rules, was more dangerous than war. By their second week in the Galactic Council, the humans were no longer an oddity, they were a disruption. Meetings that once unfolded in predictable, languid cycles now jolted with interruptions. The humans didn't wait for permission to speak. They didn't pause for ceremonial acknowledgments, or defer to hierarchical seating. They spoke when they had something to say. They asked questions others considered impolite, sometimes even invasive, and they demanded answers in plain language. Most species would spend years observing before contributing. Humanity submitted proposals on day 3. Their first motion was met with silent alarm, a direct plan to neutralize a known pirate enclave that the Council had been monitoring for the better part of a century. The Council's traditional response to piracy involved sanctions, deliberation, and vague threats of economic pressure. The humans offered coordinates, a strategy, and a timeline. They didn't wait for consensus. They executed it. The pirate base went dark in 12 hours. Shock spread faster than official response. By the time the Council convened to formally discuss the situation, the humans had already uploaded footage of the operation, complete with technical logs and audio commentary. They had used no lethal force. Instead, they disabled the pirate fleet's life support, rerouted them toward an uninhabited system, and left automated beacons broadcasting surrender instructions. The chair being called the action premature, reckless, and lacking decorum. The human reply: "You had 80 years." What disturbed the Council most wasn't the success. It was the implication that process had been bypassed, and that the bypass had worked. There were no appeals. No preliminary consensus matrices. No deference to planetary sovereignty. Just action. From that point, everything shifted. Humans began circulating, briefing digests, concise, one-page summaries of every issue discussed. They used color-coded urgency markers, bold fonts, and even direct conclusions. Other species found them both alarming and addictive. Some began referring to them during meetings instead of the official transcripts. A junior ambassador was quietly reprimanded for quoting a human digest during an open session. His defense: "At least I understood it." More violations followed. Humans rejected the use of scented vapor emitters during negotiation sessions, calling them a distraction. They refused to sit through the 3-hour preamble of the annual Economic Alignment Review, and instead submitted a data model that projected outcomes before the official analysis had even been summarized. The model was correct, down to 3 decimal points. The Council was not equipped to deal with this pace. What they considered hasty, the humans saw as standard. When confronted about their lack of protocol adherence, they responded not with apology, but clarification. "We don't mean disrespect. We mean to be effective." Their ambassador once spoke for less than 2 minutes and, in that span, corrected a translation error, exposed a budgeting flaw, and called for a vote. The room was stunned, not by what she said, but by the efficiency. No one had seen such compression of content without emotional fallout. Yet there it was, clear, calm, and complete. Old Guard Council members whispered about arrogance. But younger delegates leaned in. They saw in humanity something alien and dangerous. *clarity*. The humans didn't filter thoughts through centuries of tradition. They didn't speak in conditionals or qualifiers. They didn't hide behind subcommittees. They delivered intent with each word. A senior negotiator tried to trap the humans in a cultural faux pas by invoking a centuries-old right that required all delegates to engage in the gesture of mutual understanding, a symbolic posture exchange. The humans looked at it, asked for a schematic, and then recreated it exactly, without expression, without irony. The trap failed. The statement was clear, * we don't care why. We'll just do it if it matters to you, *. The council began to fracture under its own frustration. Some insisted the humans were violating the spirit of interstellar unity. Others argued they were embodying it, cutting through ceremonial clutter to reach shared outcomes. A vote was proposed to create a human conduct subcommittee. It failed. No one could agree on what conduct even meant anymore. Privately, more delegates began requesting meetings with the humans. Off the record. Quick consultations. Solutions. Not for diplomacy, but for results. The humans obliged, but never with pomp. Just data, directness, and delivery. What the council had viewed as tactless now began to feel like leadership. Not because the humans were right in every case, but because they acted. They made decisions. Took risks. Admitted faults. Corrected mistakes without cover-ups. In a society where delay had become virtue, the humans introduced discomfort. But that discomfort had a shape, a direction, and above all, momentum. The case of Veltrax 9 changed everything. A mining colony on the edge of council-regulated space, its status had long been marked as under review, due to suspected human rights violations. Reports indicated forced labor, resource strip mining, and the presence of mercenary enforcers. The council had opened a formal inquiry 92 years ago. The matter remained unresolved. Humans didn't wait. They requested access to the inquiry files. When told the documents were restricted due to procedural sensitivity, they'd bypassed the bureaucracy entirely. Within 48 hours, they exposed a full transmission log, intercepted communications, financial records, and video evidence of systematic exploitation. The data showed enslaved laborers, chained, drugged, and worked to collapse beneath the surface of a planet deemed too politically delicate to touch. The council chamber sat in frozen silence as the footage played. No introductions. No commentary. Just raw, unedited suffering. The images were undeniable. The evidence overwhelming. The guilt traceable. And still, the first response from the chairbeing was, "This method of revelation violates Article 17.1 of the Disclosure Accord." The human ambassador didn't respond with anger. Her voice was level, words deliberate. "The Accord didn't stop the abuse. We did." The next day, the humans issued a demand: immediate intervention, asset seizure, and arrest of the corporate syndicate leaders responsible. No one moved. Instead, a procedural vote was proposed to discuss potential sanctions if the inquiry reached formal conclusion within a 10-year timeline. The motion passed. Intervention failed. The humans stood. All 6 delegates. They gave no speech. No protest. They simply turned their backs and walked out of the chamber. For the council, it was unprecedented. No member species had ever walked away from a vote. Protocol required respectful dissent, not absence. But the humans weren't interested in appearances. Their silence was louder than any speech. News of their exit spread faster than the footage. Entire networks picked up the act. Debate fractured across systems. Youth coalitions from 5 species held live panels quoting the human envoy's last statement outside the chamber. "If rules excuse evil, they're not laws. They're accomplices." Council elders issued statements urging calm, reaffirming the importance of structure and patience. But the narrative had shifted. The humans had done what no other species dared. They'd declared moral clarity without waiting for permission. They'd named the crime. Shown the evidence. Acted on it. And when the institution refused to move, they refused to participate. Behind the scenes, the humans launched their own operation. Not military. Coordinated aid. Anonymous supply drops. Encryption keys for laborer communication. Holographic transmissions broadcasting escape instructions in every known dialect used on Beltrax 9. Within weeks, the slave camps began to collapse, not from force, but from internal uprising, inspired and guided remotely. The Council condemned the action, called it unauthorized interference, issued an official censure. The humans didn't respond. They didn't need to. The operation worked. One of the freed workers, a Threxian engineer, gave an interview viewed over 3 billion times across neutral systems. His words were simple. They didn't ask what was allowed. They asked what was right. The Council summoned the human delegation to address charges of disruption. The humans declined. "We don't answer to a system that couldn't answer for itself," was the official reply. Delegates attempted to reassert authority through procedural channels. None landed. The humans had effectively declared independence, not from the Council as an institution, but from its inertia. What followed wasn't chaos. It was awakening. Mid-tier species, long silent in fear of protocol violations, began to speak up. Questions were asked publicly. Inquiries about other unresolved cases flooded the Council archives. Archived investigations once buried under red tape were reopened, this time by newly emboldened voices citing the human precedent. The politeness protocol, once treated as sacred, was now openly mocked in some circles. A popular phrase began trending across galactic forums. Less polite. More just. The Council, in response, attempted damage control. Reforms were proposed. Panels convened. Nothing passed. The structure that had once preserved order now resisted change at every point. The humans had done more than expose corruption. They'd exposed the paralysis beneath the polish. In that moment, the Council wasn't just facing rebellion. It was facing irrelevance. And at the center of that reckoning was a single, undeniable fact. Truth had entered the chamber, and it hadn't asked for permission. The fallout from Beltrax 9 forced a shift that even the most conservative Council members could no longer ignore. The humans, without a single vote passed in their favor, had changed the fabric of interstellar governance through sheer momentum. Their actions had made the ancient Council look like a slow echo of a system built for delay rather than justice. Quietly, a number of smaller civilizations began forming independent committees modeled after the human approach: direct oversight, short-form proposals, and operational accountability. These bodies were unofficial, unsanctioned, but rapidly effective. Trade routes once managed exclusively by the Council were being secured through ad hoc coalitions advised by human logistical teams. Conflicts between border systems that would have dragged through decades of arbitration were now resolved in months with mediated human input. They weren't using superior weapons. They were using time differently. And in the process, they were redefining legitimacy. Behind the Council's heavy doors, a panic was forming, not emotional, but institutional. The humans had not only sidestepped the system, they had demonstrated it was no longer needed to achieve order. Delegates debated whether this was a diplomatic breakdown or an evolution. Either way, the existing structure could not absorb the change without breaking itself. The Council had always assumed that control came from centralization. That diplomacy required uniformity. But humanity didn't want control. They weren't building an empire. They weren't even demanding leadership roles. They simply acted, and others followed because results mattered more than rituals. In one stark example, a crisis erupted in the Arthari Belt, a biotoxin outbreak threatening 3 inhabited moons. The Council issued a statement of concern and scheduled emergency hearings for the following lunar cycle. The humans deployed within 24 hours. Mobile decontamination labs, antiviral drones, protein synthesis teams. No ceremony. No request for jurisdiction. The moon stabilized before the Council's first hearing commenced. When the chair being questioned the humans on overstepping authority, the answer was sharp and surgical. We don't wait to be asked when people are dying. More troubling for the Council was how few member species objected. In fact, some sent thank you transmissions directly to the human delegation, bypassing official channels entirely. What began as deviation was now fast becoming precedent. The humans weren't offering disruption for the sake of chaos. Their pattern was precise: observe, act, adapt. They didn't bother to critique the council openly anymore. They didn't need to. Their actions made the case louder than words. And the longer the council resisted change, the more obsolete it appeared. For all the centuries spent perfecting non-confrontation, the council had failed to evolve when faced with clarity. The human model wasn't based on dominance. It was based on discomfort tolerance. They faced hard truths head-on, not because it was easy, but because anything else felt dishonest. That mindset was spreading. Species that had once avoided political engagement were now sending observers to human-run operations. Educational institutions began inviting human lecturers. Military advisors across systems sought access to human doctrine on risk management, not for war, but for crisis readiness. The gravitational center of influence had begun shifting, not through conquest, but through relevance. The Council, sensing erosion, tried to reclaim narrative control. They held press sessions reaffirming the values of unity, stability, and tradition. But the words felt hollow next to a steady stream of outcomes attributed to the human presence. The universe had grown tired of waiting for consensus to catch up with reality. A quiet but profound change took root when a long-standing neutral species, the Yexari, formally adopted the human-style decision model within their own planetary governance. No vote. Just a declaration. We choose what works. What once had been called disruptive was now being called effective. The fear had faded, replaced by a grudging respect that bordered on admiration. The humans had not rewritten the rules. They had shown that the rules weren't sacred, just habitual. And habits could be broken. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no revolution. No coup. Just a slow, unstoppable migration of attention and credibility from those who maintained process to those who delivered outcomes. The humans never claimed superiority. They never preached ideology. They simply refused to act as though fear of offense was more important than doing what needed to be done. And in that refusal, they became unavoidable. By the end of the standard cycle, the humans no longer needed to prove anything. Their presence had reshaped expectation, not through speeches or ambition, but through results impossible to ignore. Delegations that once looked down on them now scheduled consultations behind closed doors, hoping to understand how they did so much with so little bureaucracy. The council chamber remained unchanged in appearance, but the influence within had clearly shifted. Authority no longer rested with the oldest voices, it followed competence. The humans never asked for loyalty. They never drafted alliances. Instead, they built trust through consistency. When they committed to a task, it was completed. When they gave information, it was correct. When they warned of consequences, those consequences came. Reliability, not ritual, became their reputation. And as more crises emerged across star systems, it was to the humans that species increasingly turned, not for politics, but for solutions. One by one, previous skeptics began to adopt elements of the human method. Shorter decision loops. Contingency-first planning. Direct accountability. Entire committees were disbanded in favor of smaller, purpose-driven teams modeled after human operational units. Even long-standing interspecies rivalries began to soften under this new efficiency. Not because humanity demanded peace, but because they made it clear peace was more practical than delay. The Council, still committed to its structure, attempted a rebranding. They proposed a new sub-council for actionable affairs, designed to emulate the human pace. But the gesture fell flat. It was imitation without conviction. The documents were still layered in legal formality, the decisions still routed through 6 levels of approval. In contrast, a single human envoy handled the same issues in days, backed by transparent logs and post-action reports available to all. No permissions. Just performance. The difference was no longer philosophical. It was functional. Delegates didn't need to agree with humanity's tone to acknowledge its value. What mattered was this: when a planet flooded, when a colony went silent, when a treaty teetered on collapse, humans didn't wait for ceremony. They moved. That movement created a ripple effect. Not revolution, but recalibration. New standards emerged, unspoken but enforced by results. Clarity over tradition. Precision over process. Courage over comfort. Humanity had made the polite pace of galactic bureaucracy feel not just outdated, but dangerous. One particularly telling moment came when the Denvari Prime Minister, a being once known for his rigid formalism, publicly requested that council protocols be suspended during emergencies. His reason: in crisis, only the humans arrived. The humans never celebrated these shifts. They didn't frame their conduct as triumph. They maintained a simple message: systems that serve must serve the living, not themselves. That idea spread not by force, but by resonance. People weren't just inspired, they were relieved. Someone was finally moving at the speed of need. By the close of the cycle, the council remained intact, but its relevance had contracted. It now served mostly as a ceremonial archive, respected, referenced, but no longer relied upon. The new decisions were being made elsewhere, in corridors where clarity had become the new currency. Humanity, for its part, didn't seek to lead. They simply continued doing what worked. No campaign for dominance. No declarations of superiority. Just consistent, measured disruption that reminded every observer of a truth many had forgotten: progress doesn't come from permission. It comes from responsibility. Their reputation, once marked by unpredictability, had matured into something else: dependability under pressure. They didn't pretend to know everything. But they never used uncertainty as an excuse for inaction. That quiet certainty was now reshaping the galaxy. Not through conquest, not through doctrine, but through an undeniable pattern: where humans went, inertia broke. Where they acted, problems unraveled. And where they stood, others recalibrated their own standards, not to match their culture, but to match their clarity. In the end, the council wasn't destroyed. It was outpaced. The humans hadn't demanded a new era. They'd simply refused to wait for the old one to catch up. And without ever asking to lead, they showed the galaxy what leadership truly looked like.